Hello everyone. In this tutorial, we're going to learn how to accept keyboard input from the user. And that could take a couple of different forms. So let's start out with the scenario that we want to actually capture the user's name. So you could see here I have a really simple project. I have a label here, what is your name? And we want the user to be able to input some text so that we can use it in our project. The first thing we're going to need is some sort of control for them to share their input with us. What I want to do is come up to main and I'm going to add a child node, and Godot makes it really easy to accept user input. So the node that we want here is called line edit, and you can see here its description is a control that provides single line string editing. And so I'm going to click create, and then I'll just resize this a bit so it's easy for you to see. And I'm just going to put it in here, and you can see it's called line edit. Now I can give this a dynamic font if I want to, but let me just save and run the project, and you can see here I can click into it, and if I type on my keyboard I can actually input information. Of course we want to style this a little bit, so let me just select this, and I'm going to go ahead and add a custom font just so we get something reasonably large to see. And then there's all kinds of settings here. I'm going to set it to the center, the alignment to the center. If we wanted it to be a password, we can turn this on that we need it to be secret. So let me just see here. Let's run that, and we should see now we've got the proper font and it's reasonably big. So the question is, how do we actually use this in code? So what I want to do is actually have another label where we can see the output of what the user has typed in. But before we do that, let's actually go into our code. You can see here I have absolutely nothing. And so when you're working with a line edit node, what you have to do is actually add a signal to it. And there's a couple of different ones. So let's go ahead and add the signal text changed. I'm going to click enter. And when that happens, let's just for fun, let's find out what the text is. So I'm going to say text plus, and then I know the name of that component is line edit. We're just going to print out what is the text in that node called line edit. Let's see what happens. And so if I type in here, I see text A, text B, C, so on and so forth. And that's just going to grow the more text that I put in it. So anytime it changes, I am accepting that text. Now, sometimes we only want to accept when the user does something, such as press enter, right? We don't want to capture every single letter the user's typing. What we want to do in this example is to capture their name. So one of the ways that we might do that is to listen for some keyboard input. Now, another function that is built into Godot that we haven't talked about is the input function. And this is very similar to the ready function. It comes with Godot, it's pre-packaged, and it's really useful for us to do stuff with. One of the things that's important about the input function is that it takes one parameter. Now, we could call this parameter anything. We could call it E. A lot of times you'll see people call it EV for event, but I like to, just so we understand what it means, that we're going to just call it event. If you don't have that parameter in there, Godot will complain. Now, what we want to do here is check if something has occurred. And specifically, we are going to see, is the input that just happened, is it key pressed, and then is it key enter? In other words, we want to know, did the user press the enter key? And if that is true, then we want to do something. And so I'll just test this by putting in a print statement, the user pressed enter. And we'll just make a statement of that. And then I'm going to comment out this other one just so we can see how this works. Okay, let me save this, and let's see, is Godot complaining? Oh, I need to, because I commented that out, I need to put a pass statement in there. Good. Oh, I forgot to end my if statement, and let me run this. Good. And I'm going to type in what is your name? I'm going to type in my name, Dan. And when I hit the enter key, like right now, if we look down at the bottom, the user pressed enter. And so what we might want to do is store that value in a global variable. So let's create a global variable, and let's call it username. And by default, it's not equal to anything. When the user press enter, I am going to set that global variable username to be equal to line edit dot text. And then maybe what I could do is actually put that text into another label. So let's come back over to design mode, and just quickly, I'm going to duplicate this first label, and I'm going to rename this just so we can tell the difference. We'll call that the welcome label, and right now they're on top of each other. Here's the welcome label. By default, I want it to be empty, so it's not going to have any text, but when the user presses enter, I want to update that label. So let's create a function called welcome user. That is simply going to say that I want the welcome label text to be equal to some string. And I'm going to say welcome plus the value stored in username, just like that. And then, of course, I have to make sure that I call that function when the user presses enter. And let's see if this works. What is your name? I'll put in Emily. I press enter. Welcome, Emily. Fantastic. That works very nicely. Now, I want to show you one last thing, how we can capture keyboard input. So in order to do that, I need to switch over to design mode for a minute. And I am going to, in main, I'm going to create a sprite very quickly. And as a child of that, sprite, I am going to add a color rect. Good. And then I will just set its color to red so that we can see it. And then I'm going to move this color rect over here. So one of the things that we can do is look for other keyboard input so that we could move this sprite around. So for example, if I come into my code, right now I am paying attention to whether the key being pressed by the user is the enter. But of course, I could also listen for other keys. So for example, I might want to say else if the key is W, do something. And so if that was the case, what I could do is say, I want to actually move sprite. I want to change its position, and I'm going to make its actually, if W is typically the up direction. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to say +10. So let's see if that works. I'm going to run my code, and if I press the W button, whoops, I'm going the wrong way. I actually need to subtract 10. And if I hit W, you see I can move that box around by simply adjusting the Y position of sprite. And of course, I could do this for the other 4 common keys used for navigation. For south, that means I would be adding this, and I can keep going to do A, which would be actually changing the X value and making it smaller, reducing the X value, and finally the D key, which would actually add 10. So if I save this and run it, I have full control over now. I can move this left, right, up and down very easily using the built-in index function in Godot. And I can also, using a line edit node, I can accept user input and store that in a variable for later use. So that is how we accept keyboard input from the user.